They called it dry wells because the ground had already been hollowed out by other hands long before ours. Old missile tubes, abandoned aquifers, service tunnels that never remembered who poured them. On the maps, it was a research utility with a wind farm feeder line and an inert scattering lab. On the badge reader, it was a set of numbers that opened doors if you were steady enough not to blink when the LED turned green. On my assignment sheet, it was home. My name was Security Officer Maya Anwar. My job was to make sure the doors stayed closed until they needed to open, and then to stand where the hinge could see me. You learned the building through your shoes. The vibration of the freight elevator cable sang one note near the cafeteria and another near genetics. The neutron line, buried in a jacket of water and doctrine, barely registered as a feeling in the teeth, like a storm might be thinking of you. The air always had a penny taste if you were honest about it. Coffee never hid it. Nothing did. GLASSHARP lived 3 levels below the lie about the wind farm. The briefing said it was a viral instrument designed to accelerate DNA repair, with special emphasis on post-irradiation contexts, a way to sharpen the body's own knife. The word adjuvant appeared everywhere, married to neutron exposure, in a syntax that implied this had been inevitable for years, and we were merely catching up. I was not paid to critique the physics. I was paid to walk the catwalks, check the seals, log the checks, and be the reliable witness when systems said they were in spec, and the room said otherwise. Most days at Tri-Wells were a liturgy of ordinary. The scent of vacuum grease, the chalk-line squeak of a lab coat sleeve against glass, the immodest rattle of a cart over a bad weld. We performed safety in the same way a choir performs rehearsal, again and again, until it was muscle. If a tech hung their dosimeter wrong, I told them to fix it. If a researcher propped a door for just a second, I stood in the gap and pointed until the second confessed it had been longer. I learned who whistled, who hummed, who tapped with their pen when thinking. On good days, I pretended knowing these habits made me their shepherd. On worse days, I called it surveillance with nicer shoes. The morning the desert sky went to chalk, I finished a perimeter run, signed for a case of sealing film that someone insisted had vanished last Friday, and came up under the catwalk over clinical. A maintenance flag blinked on the environmental panel. Ventilation jitter. Resolved. It was the kind of hiccup that appears as a self-correct on a screen and as a thread of air on your wrist. I flagged it for a real check anyway. Lights were the wrong kind of honest. The neutron line was scheduled for a calibration pulse that afternoon, but the clock we all pretended not to depend on had that event for 1400, not 1123. Still, when the floor beneath my boots made the smallest suggestion of settling, as if a giant had exhaled down in the concrete, I looked at the time, out of reflex. 11:23, the kind of number that feels made up. No alarms, no angry lights, no intercom clearing its throat to announce the thing we'd rehearsed for every quarter, until our mouths forgot we were only pretending. I would not have noticed anything at all if not for the chirps. Not an alarm? Those come on purpose. This was background. The polite, periodic blips of personal dosimeters, the soft rain of a Geiger counter on a cart someone hadn't powered down. The building always had that rain if you listened to it. On good days, it was weather. On bad days, it was a clock. Today, it seemed louder, not in volume but in opinion, as though the sound had found a reason to be here. A tech named Hughes stood in clinical behind the observation glass. I recognized him by the hair that could not decide what year it was, and the way he whistled Rachmaninoff, like a man who had learned it from an elevator. He was correcting a tubing run when his head tilted, a careful degree too far toward the Geiger counter's drizzle. At the same instant, 2 trial participants seated in recliners, volunteers, contracted, briefed until our mouths were desserts, stilled as if someone had folded time around them. It took a beat to understand I was holding my breath. I let it go carefully and watched as the exhalation fogged my side of the glass. Inside, one of the subjects smiled. It was almost right. Teeth and muscle and the idea of reassurance, but shallow in the gums, protective, as if he were trying not to frighten whatever he was listening to. The skin across his cheek had a new sheen, pores bright, like dew had ideas about him. The hairs along his forearms stood not randomly, but together, a field in wind that knew where the wind came from. I tapped the glass with a knuckle. Hughes did not look toward me. Neither did the participants, all of them, including Mia, from virology in a yellow tieback cap, held their faces at an angle that felt like respect for the metronome in the room. Another chirp, a shift of the eyes, a long blink timed with a click, as if the lids wanted the beat too. I thumbed my radio without thinking. It crackled, barely, and I felt the crackle like a hand on the back of my neck. I let the button go as if it had teeth. I did not speak. In the corridor, the environmental panel still offered me a green field of compliance. I stared at the little LCD readout, and it stared back, with numbers that said nothing about the people breathing differently in the room below me. I slid the observation hatch a fraction. Even that small motion sent a sibilant kiss along the seal. Inside, Hughes cocked his head further, in a gesture both tender and wrong. The dosimeter on his chest chirped. His tongue touched the roof of his mouth as if to count along. The sound in the room gathered, the badge reader's single courtesy beep as someone shifted against it. The tiny rattles nested inside a centrifuge that wasn't on, but hadn't forgotten what spinning meant. The drawn-out snore of a tired refrigeration unit 2 doors down, steady as pre-war machinery. "Hey," I tried, but only in my throat. No air. Words have weight. Even a whisper is an object that falls. I have stood with those thoughts written in the manual. I have marked the checkboxes beside them. It is a different kind of seeing when the world demonstrates why the manual was written. The clinical ward had 2 interior doors and 1 exterior service egress. The interior doors had better seals. The service door had the faster path to the shaft network that runs behind the building, like veins you hope you never need. I filed the thought and lifted the hallway handset to put a call to control. I did not dial. The pad made a tiny tick as my finger hovered. That was enough to taste the choice. Behind the glass, Mia's hand rose, hovering near the clip of her own dosimeter, as if the device were a pet that needed praise. Her pupils were wide, but not from fear. Her breath fought to even itself into the rhythm the room offered. When the Geiger counter stuttered, it always stutters, you could see a small, shared wince move across them all. A flocking motion without feathers, just people's insides discovering a reason to move together. I have been taught that pattern recognition is the first survival tool the brain reaches for. We stare at clouds and make faces. We hear a motor and decide whether the sound means fine or run. In that room, pattern recognition had become an organ. The regular, the periodic, the gentle repeated thing, the chirp, the click, the steady compress and release, was not background, but gravity. They were falling into it, or it was taking them. The difference is linguistic. The outcome is the same. I called up the GLASSHARP briefings in my head, the way you do with words you swore you'd never need. Accelerated repair dynamics under neutron stress. Modulation of cellular response pathways. Adjacent to that, the day's earlier note about ventilation jitter. Then the line, the thing nobody prints, but everyone knows. All systems behave together, eventually. A dose is a number on paper, until it isn't. A virus is a promise until it meets a living clock. In the corner of the room, the living clock was a cheap counter that ticks, because that is what it was born to do. I have seen panic make good people loud. I have seen quiet keep people breathing. The rule came to me, not like something I thought up, but like something I had always known and had only misplaced. They hunt what repeats. I do not know why the word hunt arrived already chosen. Maybe because people are prey to clocks in gentler ways all the time. You set a timer to make pasta and return when it sings. You cross a street when the signal ticks. We follow beats and call it order. In clinical that morning, order had learned to reach back. I tried another small test to prove to myself what my skin already understood. I let the observation hatch fall the tiniest amount, less than a coin's thickness. The seal made a sticky kiss that repeated a soft ch-ch-ch as the rubber found the metal in stages. Foreheads turned, not to me, not to the hatch, but to the third kiss, to the fact that there had been more than one. The first did not deserve their attention. The second announced a possibility. The third confirmed the world. I arrested the hatch with my palm and held it, feeling the physics. My breath had become a problem I had to solve with my face, moving air without letting it become audible. My heartbeat, suddenly huge in my throat, counted me out of the room. Skin went bright along my forearms, pores sensitized by the same conditioning I was watching, as if a mirror had been carried past. And Hughes finally looked at me. It was not like a person recognizing a person, but like a receiver finding a signal. His eyes did not hunt my face. They hunted for the next beat. Finding none, they moved on. He turned, gentle, and drifted a half step toward the Geiger counter's drizzle, as a plant angles toward a screened window. I forced myself to lift my hand from the hatch and step backward into the corridor, where the lights still promised that the world was simple. I slid my own dosimeter's clip with my thumb, not yet removing it, just acknowledging that it existed and that its opinions might soon matter more than the batteries inside my radio. The handset's cord breathed a little as it settled. Even that faint periodic sway felt like an offense. Control would need to be told. The sublabs would need to be sealed. The back corridors would need to be made into quiet roads. You make lists when the ground turns to glass beneath you. It gives your feet somewhere to stand. But the first item was not a door, not a phone, not a person. It was a removal. Stop the repetitions, you can stop. I took one more look through the glass. The room had become a small orchestra, with no conductor, each instrument tuning to the nearest perfect fifth it could find, and discovering, with satisfaction, that the fifth had teeth. I met Mia's eyes and pretended she met mine. I raised my palm as if to swear to something and saw my hand tremble in a tiny cycle that wanted badly to become a metronome. I let it fall, counted silently to the most irrational number I could remember, and turned away from the hatch. The radio at my shoulder waited. The handset in its hook waited. The building in its own way waited. I did not make them sink. I walked toward control on the softest feet I owned, the rule already writing itself inside my ribs. The first thing I turned off was myself. No radio, no orders shouted down the steel throat of a corridor. I let the part of me that wants to fill the air with plan and certainty go dim. I unclipped my dosimeter and sealed it in the foam-lined drawer beneath the observation console. Its little heart could beat in the dark without making any more converts. Then I palmed the corridor switches one by one until the fluorescence gave the hallway back to the concrete and the hum sank into the floor. Inside clinical, Hughes and the others still faced the cheap instruments as if attending a service. The clicks from the Geiger counter were the priest. Every repeated sound in that room had become scripture. I slid the observation hatch closed in a single continuous motion so the seal wouldn't speak in syllables. The rubber kissed the frame once and kept it secret. I breathed through my nose, counting against an uneven prime, and took 3 steps backward. Control was 2 turns away, behind a door that coughed when the latch fell. I didn't go. A cough is a pattern's favorite cousin. Instead, I went sideways into the cross corridor that ran above pharmacology and pushed the crash bar on Sublab D's service entrance with my hip. The door sighed like an exhausted person and then thought better of it. I could live with one sigh. 7 civilians looked up at me, with hands still holding whatever work had been taken from them mid-breath. A pipette, a tablet, a pen paused over a log sheet that would never be finished. 2 soldiers from day shift stood in the doorway, like men who had been told to guard an idea. One of them had his carbine across his chest, fingers so carefully straight that the knuckle went pale. The other had already read my face. He was unhooking his radio with his free hand, and when I shook my head and put my finger to my mouth. "Quiet," I mouthed, but without voice. I put my palm flat, held it low, and pressed the air down with it. Steady. Sandra, the biostatistician who smelled like wintergreen gum, even when she wasn't chewing any, nodded too fast, then caught herself and nodded once more, slow, as if passing an exam. We went to work without words. I pointed at a vent that ticked in gusts, and a kid in an ill-fitting lab coat brought me sealing film. We smoothed it over the grill, our fingers making a silent choreography of corners and creases until the plastic was tight enough to drum and then not tight enough to drum at all. We stuffed paper towels, thick brown ones that resent fingers, into the door's bottom crack where the rubber hadn't been honest since installation. Someone lifted their boot, and the lace tips tapped the tile twice before they got the hint and began to unlace entirely. I held out my hand and they handed me their keys, the one with the grocery loyalty tag that chirped when it hit hard surfaces. I pocketed the whole ring. The soldiers understood before I gestured. They unclipped their sling snaps and let the swivels hang. One removed his watch because it beeped every hour, and even though that was 40 minutes away by the wall clock, I took it and slid it into a drawer with my dosimeter in my mind. I showed them my soles, lifted, and then set my boots in my hands. The tile under our socks was cold and honest. We became animals again. Weight toward the toes, ankles flexible, calves taut, as we redistributed the burden of our bodies into quiet. The shaft network was the next goal, a dark run behind clinical that had been designed for maintenance and for exactly the kind of day no one truly believes will come. The fastest way there was through the clinical service door and down a short corridor to a hatch with a bent label that still said C in an alphabet that had been stenciled during another administration. I pointed toward that door, then toward their mouths, then toward their feet. Everyone nodded like accomplices. A pager lived in my pocket out of habit, the kind of habit that no one supports until the day it saves them. Its vibration motor was good. I'd dropped it too many times for the tone to be reliable, but the shake was a metered animal. I set it on the hallway floor outside Sublab D, 20 feet from the clinical door, and double-tapped the call button. The pager woke up. The vibration ran along the tile like a fingertip drumming under the skin. I threw a look over the observation glass and watched as Hughes's head turned slightly, not toward me, but toward the regular, patient promise on the other side of the wall. For a second lure, I used the badge reader on the old emergency cabinet, the one that had never been removed for budget reasons and now felt like grace. I set it to test mode, so it offered a polite beep at a regular interval while hunting for a phantom credential. Beep, beep, beep. The clinical room breathed in time. The 6 inside pivoted, slow and rudderless, toward the courtesy. Their mouths opened slightly, as if to taste metric on the air. I held up my hand, splayed fingers as if catching rain, and then folded them into a fist. Now, the soldiers shouldered the way fishermen shoulder nets, wide for 3 steps, then narrow. I slotted my master key into the clinical service door, leaned my whole weight into a push so the latch would take its fall as a single note, and held it gently so it wouldn't sing again. We slipped through like a thought you don't want to startle. The corridor beyond had the acoustics of a throat. Somewhere out of sight, a fan ticked, slow and apologetic. Tock, 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 at a period you could calendar by. I felt the hairs on my forearms make decisions. The group behind me went still without permission. Bodies know of when counting becomes gravity. I raised my hand in that same flattening gesture and kept moving, heel to toe, skimming along the wall where the sound picked up less resonance. We were 20 steps from Hatch C when the reply came. Thin as moth wings on foil, a flutter in the ductwork. Metal answering metal in little affectionate taps. Another flutter closer. The talk had thrown a rope into the dark, and something was learning how to catch it. I slid forward until my lips were at the fan's grill. The air slipping through the blades tasted of ozone and impatience. I folded a nitrile glove twice, then twice again, and fed it into the gap between blade and housing. The fan chewed and choked and then surrendered. The motor whined once like a man denied a song. And then there was only the kind of silence that makes you realize you've been living loud for years. Hands in the duct, wherever they were, faltered. The flutter moved past us, then away, as if fingers were reading along a page of sheet metal and had lost their place. I counted a long number that didn't try to divide itself and moved again. Sandra's breath snagged on a sob, and I squeezed her wrist without looking. Her bones told me she heard. Hatch C wore a label that had been repainted 3 times, and still smelled of old stencils. The lever liked to clack before it drew back, so I took its jaw in mine and pulled with pressure and patience until the latch thought it had made its noise and gave me the door for free. We slid into a vertical shaft that had been cut through the building's spine. Ladder rungs on one side, cable tray on the other, dust that had the memory of a flood in it. Someone's last monsoon had left a line at knee height, a brown tide mark across a decade of forgotten gum wrappers and a single zip tie that still had dreams. We went down. Feet found rungs by toe feel, then heel. Hands found the places the last hands had learned for sure. Above us, the corridor made new noises as the clinical room decided which patterns it missed. Below us, a different humming came and went as ducted air chose other paths. I led with my ear and my teeth, feeling for periodicities, the way a miner feels for gas with a candle. My own body offered me temptations. Swallow, cough, snort, like the sting in the sinuses. And I denied all of them, letting them drain into the back of my throat where shame lives. 2 landings down, a motion circuit waited like a friendliness we did not want. The exterior alarm on the old supply cage had been installed with faith and a loose budget. Its wire ran along the ladder, wolfing up staples for 1/3 of a meter, and then dove through a knockout. I pulled the wires slack toward me with the gentleness you reserve for snakes and eased the quick disconnect apart. The circuit's side open. Somewhere far away, a panel would put a yellow box around a word. No one would come to see it. Not today. The supply cage had been welded shut by someone with a deadline. The beads were honest, but not loyal. There was a line at the bottom where the metal had kissed and then remembered it didn't love the other piece. I put my shoulder into the spot and leaned until the steel remembered its hinge dreamed of moving. The gap was not big. It had to be enough. We went through sideways, without belts or pride, the soldiers taking their rifles by the fore ends like violins, so the slings never dared to whisper. A coffee can of desiccant rolled a 1/4 inch and then stopped, understanding for a moment what the world needed. We came out into the fossil of a hallway that had once been an access road for deliveries. The door to the desert wore dust in layers. I put my ear to it. The other side had a wind and nothing that knew how to count. I let myself have one sound, a hinge groan, rusty and singular. As the door opened to sky, the light went feral on our faces, and everyone blinked like people who had been swallowing their blinking for too long. We crossed the pad to the perimeter phone. An unlovely box of industrial plastic on a pole that had outlived 12 euphemisms for "this place doesn't exist." The handset had a creak I wanted to kill. I didn't lift it. I set it in its cradle and used the keypad like a typewriter instead. I typed an entire message in the dumb little screen address field because the system let me, because somewhere a parser would throw up its hands and hand it to a person. Clinical compromised, rule of silence drawn by periodicities. Eva via Schaftsy, lock all sound sources, cut motion for exits, bring foam, bring concrete. I pressed send and pretended the chirp didn't happen. If it did, it was only one. We didn't celebrate, we didn't speak. We stood in the stinging noon with our boots in our hands and the desert opening around us. Like an instrument, no one was brave enough to play. The soldiers did a head count with fingers, tapping their own thigh, once for each living person in front of them. 7 civilians? 2 soldiers? Me. 10 taps. No one repeated the tap in any rhythm. I watched them deliberately break time, tap, wait, differently, and felt grateful in a way I did not have room for. The plan from there was written in other people's handwriting. Foam to fill the mouths of vents. Concrete to weight the building with a final silence. Lockouts on anything that could beep or hum or declare itself in intervals. The after-action list would be a hymn in a language for lawyers. My part, for the next 40 minutes, was to keep my little flock from giving the world any anchors. We walked along the fence line on the sand, where the crunch would be irregular. We went past the wind farm feeder that was not a feeder, and the sign that warned about snakes, as if snakes cared about signs. We took the road that had potholes you could not fall into any pattern with, and I loved each pothole as if it were kin. Only when the perimeter vehicle crested the rise, tires laying down a noise that wasn't even noise, just air making space, did I let anyone make a sound on purpose. A single cough, then a second, not timed. The civilians began to remember their bodies belonged to them. A sob escaped and was held, and I did not punish it. Not all repetition is a threat. Some repetition is healing, I told myself, and heard the way the thought wanted to become a litany. I handed the soldiers back their slings. I gave Sandra her keys and told her, with a whisper that wasn't a whisper so much as a shape in the air, that she had done everything right. The vehicle door opened and shut, once each. We climbed in and let the suspension negotiate with the washboard of the access road, while I made my mouth say nothing at all. As the truck rolled us towards the far gate, toward the place where the building ended and the story would begin in other people's speech, I felt the pager in my pocket. A small mute wait now. I imagined it still sitting back there on the tile, buzzing dutifully at its interval, drawing the turn toward its secular patience. I imagined the badge reader chirping its little calls to a ghost card, polite as a concierge in an empty lobby. I imagined the flock move into those points like iron to pattern, heads tilted, throats working, breath trying to become a metronome. They hunt what repeats, I wrote inside myself, where nothing could hear. And we, if we are going to live, must become inconvenient to count. They seal dry wells the way a dentist seals a root. Layer by layer, a slurry of stone and intention until nothing living could taste its nerves. I watched from the perimeter berm with my hands inside the sleeves of a loaner jacket that smelled like other people's fear. The trucks arrived in a line that felt like a sentence. Boom arms unfolded like careful birds. Foam went in first to choke the ducts and hush the lungs of rooms. Then the concrete, grey and slow, a tide that didn't care about the names of the things it buried. There were men on scaffolds with radios. I made them switch to one press mode. One press for stop, one press for go. They laughed at me until I let them stand under the catwalk over Clinical and hear what I'd heard. No one laughed after that. They wrapped the radios in towels and learned to point. The desert took the day back by inches. Heat lay in flat sheets over the mixer drums, a visible vibration that made the air seem confessed. The chalk sky softened, then reasserted itself. I counted trucks until the numbers lost their edges and became a rhythm I refused. When I had to breathe, I made each breath a different length from the last. There's a smell to new concrete, wet stone, lime, a sweetness like a tooth ground down. It followed me into the debrief. The room for debriefing had carpets and a picture and chairs that suggested the government knew how to be gentle. A colonel with the kind of face that looks carved from common sense asked me to start from the top. I didn't. I started from the middle where the noise had become a law. They wrote down what I said and then made me say it again, in a different tense, until my words fit the boxes someone had pre-labeled for them. The after-action draft was mine. I wrote it with my wrists braced against the table so my fingers wouldn't drum. Synergistic misregulation under neutron-adjacent conditions, I typed, and the language tilted on me like a sidewalk after rain. GLASSHARP vector may have potentiated sensory gating pathways. On the screen, the sentence blinked at a rate exactly wrong for my eyes. I cut the blinking by setting the display to never sleep. I didn't notice until later that I'd also turned off every clock in the document editor. The cursor stopped pulsing, the notifications learned silence. Small victories, dangerous ones. They tested me the way you test glassware for hairline cracks. Bright lights, careful taps, blood draws, 100 little vials in their carrier like a choir that had forgotten how to sing together. The Geiger counter on the doctor's cart was off, and still I heard it. Or I remembered it well enough to hear the memory. My labs came back unremarkable, which is a word that makes me think of shallow graves. No significant dose, the radiation nurse said, smiling like a person who means it. Your dosimeter logged well within tolerances? I nodded. I'd killed my dosimeter's little voice. It had kept counting without sound. It had done its job better than I had done mine. There were funerals without bodies. There were phone calls with parents who wanted adjectives I did not have clearance to give. Sudden complications, someone's template said, and I thought about how the world is made of complications so slow we mistake them for rules. I sent a letter to Hughes's sister that the review board amended until the only true thing left in it was his first name. I signed my own name like I was pushing a coin into a slot. It dropped without a sound I could hear. Still, I felt the pull in the bones of my hand. Sandra texted once from the clinic where they were running checks and checks on the checks. Dreamt the fridge sang to me, she wrote. I typed back and then deleted it, and then typed again. It's not singing. She wrote, I know. Neither of us believed the other was wrong. When the trucks were gone and the perimeter turned into a line of dust, with a badge reader at each end that now always answered in a single, unduplicated tone, they released us to our lives in staggered groups. The soldiers went back to their barracks, as if a door had shut, and the hallway beyond it proved there was nothing to be seen. The civilians hugged each other, one embrace per person. No patting. I took the back seat of a transport that smelled like winter and didn't speak. The desert ran past in waves of scrub and shadow. Every fence post we passed was a temptation. Everyone I refused. Home was an apartment that pretended to be a ship at berth. White walls, low cabinets, a clock on the kitchen counter I had declined to set for 3 months and had nearly stopped seeing. On the first night, I unplugged the refrigerator to quiet the compressor. 2 hours later, I plugged it back in because milk has rules too. I turned my bedside alarm to face the wall. Light still bled through the seams, a small, insistent rectangle. I pried the battery out and set it in a bowl. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum my ears fell into without consent. You don't notice the repetitions until you go looking for them, and then they knock politely on every door. The crosswalk near my building ticked out its patient Morse. A rooftop unit on a strip mall 2 blocks over coughed every 7 seconds, a smoker clearing his throat because the night had become serious. In the alley, a drip counted the hours under a slow leak that no one had decided to own. My neighbor above me ran her dryer, and the drum made a soft whump at each revolution where a seam was proud. Every one of those sounds was harmless. Every one of them wanted me. I felt my breath surge to meet them in the middle. I told it no. I bought rugs and I baselined the washing machine and I put felt pads under the chairs. I took the battery out of the smoke detector and left the wired one because I would rather burn than be quickened by a chirp at 3 a.m. A maintenance man came to adjust the radiator, and I gave him a note. Please, if it rattles, I won't sleep. He tightened a valve. He asked a question. I nodded too many times in a row and stopped myself as if I had been caught stealing. People called. My mother left me voicemails in a language that carries comfort, even when it is scolding. I let the messages collect and then listened to them all in a row, mouth covered, body rigid, catching myself as the cadence tried to take my breath like a hand. I called her back by tapping out a text with no punctuation, only small words that can't march. She sent a heart, which is a perfect loop, a repetition, so I did not open the thread for a day. I still had my badge for a while. You don't unmake someone. You let their access expire. Every time I passed it on the table, it flashed in the corner of my eye. It remembered the reader's beep, as if that were a person it had loved. I slid it into an envelope and mailed it to the address on the shutdown memo. The postal clerk stamped it twice. I watched the rubber find the ink and kissed the paper and kissed again. I swallowed a sound my throat wanted. For a week, I woke before the dawn and stood on the balcony with my fingers in the rails. The city's dawn is its own orchestra. Garbage trucks, street cleaners, the announcement of light to things that must start on a schedule. I learned the tricks, opening the balcony door during certain deliveries so the city's bass could fill the room, turning on the bathroom fan to drown out a neighbor's morning grinder. I learned to break my own habits. The time I brush my teeth, the number of strokes I can stomach before the mirror returns a stranger. I leaned into a symmetry and it pushed back with a surprising gentleness. Not all rules need you to keep them. Some rules keep you, but the world will find you where you live. In the supermarket, they put the scanner gun in my hand so I can check myself out. And the gun chirped with each item, and the line of people waiting behind me became a procession to a beat I had accidentally written. The clerk asked if I was okay. I nodded and realized I was nodding in sets of 2. I stopped. People are always kinder than you fear until you need them to be, and then they are only kind enough to survive. I placed the gun on the counter and left with nothing. In the shower, I tried to sing and found that my voice wanted to fold itself around the rhythm of the water. I moved the shower head enough to upset the pattern and felt like a bad person and a saint. I slept with a pillow over one ear, not to hide from sound, but to make it uneven. I learned that my own heartbeat could become a metronome if I let it. After a while, I moved the pillow to my chest and pressed down until the beat felt like someone else's problem. They processed me out with signatures and a briefing on the briefing I would not give. The email read like an apology, written by a committee that didn't want to admit what it was apologizing for. "We appreciate your service," it said, which is one of the oldest repetitions in the world. I clicked on the attachment, and it downloaded in progress bars that filled at regular intervals. I watched each bar become a ladder and did not climb. Some nights I dreamt the paw. The boom arms extended and concrete fell, and I could hear through the stone the way whales hear through oceans. A badge reader chirping in a small brave room, a pager buzzing against tile like a trapped fly that doesn't understand windows are not air, a footfall too carefully spaced. In the dream, I stood above it all and understood that silence is only a very long period. Counting still. Everyone is always counting. The day the call came to confirm the last inspection, I went back to the fence. The air over the pad had calmed. The concrete had cured into a fact. They had sealed the shafts with caps that fit like teeth. A single flag on a short pole marked the place where someone might someday build an innocuous storage facility. A geologist with a clipboard and a smile asked if I wanted to look at the settlement numbers. I said no. Numbers do not love anyone back, and I had used up my ration. On the drive home, the radio in the transport flickered and died. The driver slapped it once, twice, 3 times with the flat of his hand, and I felt each slap in my molars. He shrugged and hummed tunelessly, as if to show me how brave he was about it. I rolled down the window and let the outside air write its own ungoverned measure on my skin. When I got home, I packed a box of things that make noise because they believe they are helping. Timer, metronome from a guitar class I took in a life where I thought rhythm passed through me instead of taking me apart. The novelty clock with legs that runs away on wheels when it's time to wake. I sealed the box and wrote "for later" on the lid, which is another way to say never, and then carried it to the storage unit, which is another way to say grave. On my last evening, before the calendar rolled me into a month, when no one would expect me to answer questions, I cooked pasta. I set the pot to boil and stood with a wooden spoon in my hand and did not set a timer. I watched the water come around to agitation in no pattern at all. Tiny eruptions, here, there, now, not now. Random enough to be comfort. When it began to roll, it did so with a roar that has no beat. I salted, I stirred, I tasted, I waited. I had almost convinced myself that this could be a way to live. Then the refrigerator hummed to life. The simple act of a machine keeping a promise, and I felt my breath go looking for it the way a child reaches for a parent's hand in a dark theater. I put the spoon down and leaned into the counter and counted an ugly set of numbers that don't divide into anything. The hum went on. The hum kept its word. In the next apartment, a washing machine found its balance and began to thump a little, offish and steady. Somewhere above me, a phone buzzed on a glass tabletop at a frequency that was almost kind. I turned the refrigerator off at the wall. The hum died, and in its place came the ghost of it, the way a boat keeps rocking after the wake has gone on to trouble other shores. In the quiet that followed, I could hear the small bones in my ear decide who they worked for. I ate the pasta at the sink. It was overcooked and perfect. I let the water run at the tap in a stuttering stream that refused to find a rhythm. And for a minute, I loved it the way you love a dog that will never learn the trick. Outside, the city's crosswalk ticked, a tiny metronome for strangers' feet. A voice from a television 2 floors down laughed in loops. A car alarm tested itself and then stopped, embarrassed. The world kept itself busy inventing clocks. I lay down without the pillow on my chest and stared at the ceiling until the dark forgot my face. The building creaked once, then not again, and I thanked it like a person. My heart moved in my ribs with the patience of tides, and I told it no, and it kept going because it loves me more than I love myself. I waited for sleep the way you wait for a bus, pretending you won't be angry if it doesn't come. And then, in the exact center of the night where numbers are tightest, I heard it. Not from the street, not from the walls, not from any of the obedient machines I had taught to behave. From inside. A small regular thing, not my heartbeat, not the colon's shy peristalsis, not breath, but an idea given a metronome. Tick, tick, tick. A kindness, a promise, an invitation. I held my breath until the ticking got louder, because that is what you do when you love something that might unmake you. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was healing. I told myself it was the concrete settling miles away, sending its long, patient answer through the ground and up my bones. I listened. The ticks did not stop. They did not hurry. They did not ask for permission. They were the most reasonable sound I had ever heard. I turned my face to the wall so I wouldn't see the clock I had forgotten to take down. I closed my eyes to make the darkness less even. I sorted my breaths into a chaos I could live with. The little sound waited me out, like weather. Somewhere inside the sealed miles of dry wells, the lures we left behind, pager, badge reader, anything that had ever believed in regularity, was sleeping under stone. Somewhere under my sternum, something else had learned to keep time. I smiled the way Hughes had smiled, all gums, careful not to frighten the sound. Then I opened my mouth and breathed against it until my breath won. It took longer than it should have.